We are back, Sam Seder on the Majority Report. On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome back to this program Glenn Greenwald. He is, of course, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, co-founder of The Intercept. Glenn, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's great to be back on your program show, Sam. Thanks for having me.
So, all right. So, obviously, the big story in the news last, I guess, week or 2 weeks ago was the bringing of the Mueller report, I guess, to the DOJ. The submission of the Mueller report to the DOJ, essentially the end of the Mueller investigation, at least under Mueller himself. Some of the prosecutors, my understanding is, have gone off to other jurisdiction and could very well be working on some related investigations. But the Mueller investigation, as it was constructed, is over at this point. And we have seen, as of today, Friday, when we are recording this, only the 4-page summary from Barr on the Mueller report. So, all right, I got not a lot of criticism, but some pointed criticism for having any coverage whatsoever of the investigation as it was going on. We, I think we do a daily show. We had maybe 3 or 4 interviews that even were tangentially related to the Mueller investigation, or maybe more that were tangentially, but in terms of like the main thrust of the Mueller investigation, maybe 3 or 4 over the course of 2 years. And to me, that seemed like it was a legitimate amount of coverage to provide for this. I think you obviously have a critique of the excesses. I think we share in that critique. But so let me give you an opportunity to explain, like, why is this such a big deal? I mean, the amount of coverage, because I think we agree that there were certainly elements of the media that got obsessive about this. There were certainly some politicians who were ringing alarm bells. I don't know that we know all that they know or not. There's no way to know, but certainly politicians will leverage what they can. But why is it so important as it seems to be in terms of what you've expressed?
Well, so let me address, first of all, the issue of the coverage of your show and the media more broadly. I don't actually have a problem with the media covering the Mueller investigation or any credible allegations of criminality or corruption on the part of the president. I think that's what the media ought to be doing, in fact. My criticism has typically been of media outlets that aired only one side of the story and refused to bring on not just people who believe the Mueller investigation would lead to the uncovering of serious criminality or who believe the Trump-Russia conspiracy, but then kept people who questioned or were skeptical of that theory off their airwaves so that there was really almost never any debate, which I think is just generally unhealthy. And I don't think that was true of your show. As I understand it, you talked to Matt Taibbi, a few other people who have raised questions over the years about this. So my problem, to the extent that I have a problem with the media coverage, isn't that they covered the story. I think they had to cover the story. The problem was the way in which they covered it, which was often unhinged and irrational, excluding of dissent, which, like I said, I think just generally produces an unhealthy media environment. As far as why the story itself was always so important, in my view, is because if you look at what the core allegations were, going back to the 2016 campaign, and then especially once the Steele dossier shaped the public understanding of what the allegations were, they were inherently grave and serious, not just in terms of our domestic policies, but also geopolitically, because of the possibility that they had to seriously influence, for the worse, relations between 2 nuclear armed powers. That was always those are my 2 principal concerns: is what is it doing to our domestic politics, and then what is it doing to U.S.-Russian relations. So if you look at the 2 dominant allegations, the first of which was that the Russians interfered in the 2016 election with the help or participation or collaboration of the Trump campaign. And then secondly, the more serious allegation, which is that once Trump won, he was in some way beholden to the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin, such that Trump was essentially like a blackmail victim, that a foreign country could force him to make decisions that were beneficial to that foreign country and adverse to our own. Those are really serious allegations, right? Like if either of those were true, those deserve major, major political coverage. I just from the beginning believed that neither of them had any basis in evidence. And I think the key event was not the issuance of the 4-page Barr letter that people have since fixated on. For me, the key moment was the day before when Mueller closed his investigation without indicting a single American for conspiracy between Trump and Russia over the election, without indicting Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner, even though they testified for hours and hours and hours and hours about the Trump Tower meeting, about everything else. On the issue of whether there are other prosecutions, there obviously are other cases, but the whole reason there was a special counsel appointed in the first place was because a decision was made by Rod Rosenstein after Jeff Sessions recused himself that the Justice Department, because it reports to Trump, can't investigate or prosecute Trump officials or Trump family members or people related to the Trump campaign for Trump-Russia conspiracy with regards to the election. So there's, a Southern District investigation into the Stormy Daniels payments, into various forms of Trump's financial dealings. But in terms of the core allegations that have dominated the media for the last 3 years, which is the question of collusion and the question of blackmail, those investigations are done. No, the Justice Department can't investigate those. Once Mueller closed his investigation without any indictments on those core questions, those investigations terminated. But that's why I think it deserved media coverage.
Right. And was it your understanding before the investigation happened that there was, and look, I have said ad nauseum on this program that it would be very difficult to quantify to what extent the Russian leak or I should say hack, and then leak of the emails influenced the election, and that there are, I think, maybe a dozen other reasons why Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. But was it your understanding before the investigation started that it was established that Russia had interfered in the election? I mean, regardless of
No, I don't think it was established. I think that there were enough allegations being raised that an investigation was warranted. My concern from mid 2016 when these allegations first arose, that there was something going on between Trump and Russia, which were first raised publicly by the Clinton campaign when it produced a video saying, what does Russia have on Trump? What's going on between Trump and Russia? Until mid 2017, when Mueller indicted GRU officials, or it might have been later in 2017, was that we were getting a lot of assertions from the U.S. government, from the Department of, from the Director of National Intelligence, from the CIA, that the Russian government was behind the hacking, that Putin himself ordered the hacks. And my position always was that it's certainly very plausible that Russia could have done it, right? Because Russia and the U.S., this is exactly the sort of thing they do to other countries and to one another for decades. Like, it'd be insane to come out and say, oh my God, Russia didn't do this. This is above Vladimir Putin. This, of course, is not above Vladimir Putin or any great power to spy on and interfere in. So my issue simply was I want to see evidence for it before I believe it, right? I think that's just our journalistic obligation. But I certainly never denied it or even suggested it was implausible. And in fact, one of the frustrations I had going back to January and February of 2017 was that the only things we were learning about all of this were very selected leaks coming from agencies that have a long history of misleading the public, who were protected by anonymity and therefore shielded from accountability. And what was so frustrating was we were getting these piecemeal leaks and all these claims, but no evidence to back it up. And that's why my position had always been even before Robert Mueller was appointed, was we need some kind of comprehensive, independent investigation that will dig into all of this once and for all, and then at the end of the investigation, inform the American public about what really did and didn't happen. And so I've always been an advocate of that investigation, and still am to this day. I want to see the Mueller report released as fully as possible.
So, I mean, and we should say that I think the only leak that ended up getting punished from that had any accountability was Reality Winner, right? I mean, in terms of what we knew about Russian interference into the election.
Yeah, this is something that's actually kind of amazing, because obviously I've worked with sources and whistleblowers who have been accused of violating the law, including the Espionage Act, particularly Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. And under the law, the most serious kind of leak, where it specifically says that not only the government official who does the leak, but also the newspapers that publish it can actually be found guilty under the Espionage Act. There's only a very small number of categories where you can actually be punished as a journalist for publishing leaks of information. One of those categories is if you leak intercepted communications between a foreign government and someone with whom they're communicating. Like the NSA eavesdrops on a call. If you as a newspaper publish those intercepts, under the law, you as a journalist can be punished for that. And yet somebody leaked the communications that Michael Flynn had with the Russian ambassador to the Washington Post, which is a leak I was in favor of because it proved Michael Flynn was lying. But that's like the most serious leak that you can possibly do. And yet there's been no one punished for that leak. Whereas Reality Winner, the leak that she did was something really benign. I mean, she leaked a document that, although it was marked top secret, was clearly something that belonged in the public domain and really didn't jeopardize anyone or anything, because she gave it to a news organization, The Intercept, and we redacted information in conjunction with the NSA that they told us would jeopardize people's safety or sources and methods or whatever. So she was incredibly responsible, in contrast to, say, David Petraeus, who leaked much more sensitive information, not to inform the public like Reality Winner did, but to get a more positive book from his mistress, and didn't go to jail at all. So there's clearly an imbalance there, but you're right. She's the only leaker to have been punished.
Okay. And so I mean, if there was so much extant that we did not know during this time, what is, when we hear stuff like people saying, and I don't know if you've said it specifically, but that this was a hoax, that this was a scam, is basically what you're talking about a media critique? Because I want to get on to the domestic and foreign implications, but I mean, I'm trying to get at what was so problematic, because it seems like is that a fair assessment? Is that when when we hear things like hoax or scam, it's really just a function of a relatively small group of people in the media, certainly, obviously not Fox, was not scamming on this particular topic.
Well, Fox scammed. I mean, Fox promoted a disgusting conspiracy theory about Seth Rich. But no. So obviously I do have a critique of the media, CNN and MSNBC in particular, but it extends beyond that. So I think the Democratic Party, politicians like Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell and Chuck Schumer, as well as particularly ex-members of the intelligence community, John Brennan and James Clapper and Michael Hayden, who despised Donald Trump, very much were at the forefront of creating this conspiracy theory, which I don't mean in a derogatory sense. I'm just describing neutrally what this is. It's an allegation of a conspiracy that took place that never had any evidence.
That conspiracy theory, I mean, if we're going to define it that way, that was Rod Rosenstein, right? I mean, he tasked Mueller with that, test this conspiracy theory, that there was a conspiracy,
absolutely.
Right?
He did the right thing. He said, investigate this, right? Which is much different than going on TV and asserting that it's true.
So my point is that these people did not develop the theory. I mean, look, they may have, I guess, but I mean, as far as I can tell, the edification of the theory of conspiracy was literally the message from Rosenstein to the Mueller investigation. This is the theory.
But Sam, that happened in the spring of 2017. And there was at least 8 or 9 months preceding that in which the allegations were constantly being voiced about this conspiracy. The reason that there was an investigation was because people were alleging that this happened.
Well, that's why it became a
including
criminal
very prominent
investigation.
people.
The reason why
Right,
the
exactly.
investigation launched in the first part was because there was evidence from a foreign envoy who had talked to Papadopoulos, I guess, and that began an intelligence investigation. And coupled with the fact that Trump had brought on an advisor who was already under, I guess, suspicion of being some type of Russian asset, Carter Page.
Carter Page, right?
You had an intel investigation at that point, right?
So, I mean, it's unclear to this very day what actually started the investigation. There's been news reports that it was the Carter Page suspicions that initiated the investigation. There are reports that, in fact, it was George Papadopoulos, and then there are separate reports that, at least within some sectors of the FBI, what really convinced them was the reporting of the Steele dossier. But let me just, on the question of whether this is a hoax or a scam or anything like that, explain to you what I mean by that. I do not mean by that the existence of an investigation itself was a hoax or a scam, because, as I said, I favored an investigation from the beginning because I really wanted to get to the point that we're now at, where an investigator who pretty much everybody believes or agrees is at least credible, not perfect, but credible, Robert Mueller, had unlimited resources, subpoena power, a massive team of FBI investigators and prosecutors that everyone said were the top-notch, top-level, top-flight investigators, and they spent 22 months digging into every nook and cranny of what happened. And so presumably the Mueller report is going to tell us more or less definitively what happened, which I'm really glad about, that we no longer have to rely on little bits and pieces of anonymous leaks. The reason why I say things are a scam is, let me just give you an anecdote that Michael Isikoff talked about on MSNBC the last time he was on. I don't think he's been on since. Michael Isikoff, to his great credit, because he was one of the earliest reporters who, along with David Corn, injected the Steele dossier into the public discourse, went on MSNBC and said, not only is it the case that the core allegations of the Steele dossier, he doesn't mean like the PP tape or the Prague meeting, he means like the overall narrative of the Steele dossier, that there was this elaborate, extended, multi-level conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. Not only has that been proven to be false because of the lack of evidence for it, but we all had ways to know that it was false. And had we simply been using our rational capacities as opposed to our dug-in, kind of invested mentality, we would have on many occasions realized it was false. And the example he gave, which to me is one of the most convincing, although there are a lot of these, is when Robert Mueller indicted Roger Stone for lying to investigators. If you read that indictment, it's really amazing, because what it says is that what Roger Stone lied about to investigators was the nature of the communications he was having with the Trump campaign and the communications he was having with WikiLeaks. And Robert Mueller got the text and the emails between the Trump campaign on the one hand and Roger Stone on the other. And all the way into September or October of 2016, so like not just weeks, but days before WikiLeaks released the Podesta emails, the Trump campaign was saying to Roger Stone, hey, it seems like Julian Assange is saying he has some serious dirt on Hillary Clinton. Can you do anything to find out whether that's true and what he has? And as Michael Isikoff said, the minute Robert Mueller says that, that is the proof that like the Trump campaign was not a participant in this effort, because they had no idea what WikiLeaks had. If they were in bed with the Russians the whole time, they wouldn't have needed Roger Stone to try and desperately get to London and find out from Julian Assange whether or not he had any dirt. And the fact that none of us, or very few of us, stopped and said, wait a minute, this indictment shows that this narrative that we've been fed for the last 2 years is false. It negates and refutes the narrative. I think that's what I mean by hoax and scam, that there was no real effort to find the truth. There was this interest in hoping that the Mueller investigation would lead to Trump Jr. and Kushner and Trump being frog marched out of the White House in handcuffs. And that episode kind of encapsulates for me how I think we failed in our discourse.
Now, we should be clear that that Stone was not part of the campaign. So he sort of falls outside of the scope of what at least Barr has said, was being looked at in the context of this, conspiracy, and Stone maximizing with WikiLeaks when the best time to release these things would also not be criminal, unless there was some greater, I guess. The way that WikiLeaks got the emails, I mean, we don't know, but I guess to the extent that there would be any type of chain, it's broken between Stone and the campaign, as he's not a member of the campaign, and theoretically WikiLeaks and Russia. So I just want to make that clear to people. So now.
But just quickly on that, Sam, if I could just insert one point in fact, which is, if like WikiLeaks has always said, both publicly and then even privately in private chats that got released, Roger Stone is an asshole and a liar. Roger Stone keeps claiming, because this is what Roger Stone has done in his whole career, right? Is he makes himself more important than he really is. So he's going around claiming that he had special knowledge of what WikiLeaks had. The Mueller indictment shows pretty much that Roger Stone was almost entirely in the dark, that he was trying to find out what WikiLeaks had, but knew nothing. And in fact, when he tried to speculate, he got it wrong. He kept saying he thought that this was going to implicate Tony Podesta and that it was about the Clinton Foundation. And that's obviously not what it was about. So even Roger Stone was in the dark. He was trying to find out, like we all were.
We don't know everything that has happened in terms of with Stone, right? I mean, it's still conceivable that there's stuff to happen. So I don't know if that chapter is really is written yet. But up to this point, yes, that's correct. Now, I notice, like, when you talk about the Mueller investigation, you're not saying there's no evidence, that he found no evidence anymore. Because all we know from the Barr assessment is that to the extent that he found any evidence, and maybe he didn't find any, but he could have also found some, right? But just not enough for an indictment. You agree with that?
So we're not going to know until the Mueller report is released what exactly Robert Mueller said, right? But I do think it's important to note the following. In general, prosecutors have a very narrow mandate, right? They're supposed to answer one very technical, narrow, cramped question, which is not, is somebody guilty of wrongdoing or not, but is there enough evidence to justify an indictment with some degree of certainty that you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt in a courtroom that they're guilty of that crime. And oftentimes prosecutors decline to indict somebody even though they believe they're guilty, because it doesn't rise to that really high level that we've set as a society for criminally convicting somebody, right? Beyond reasonable doubt. And in general, that's all prosecutors are supposed to do. They're supposed to just say, I'm indicting or I'm not. And when they don't indict, they're not supposed to accuse anybody of wrongdoing because it's really unfair, right? Like, imagine if a prosecutor says, I investigated Sam Seder for pedophilia. I decided not to indict him, which means you have no chance to defend yourself. But there was a lot of evidence that Sam Seder's actually a pedophile. It just didn't rise to that would be the most unfair thing to you possible, because then you're accused, but you have no chance to defend yourself. That's why people were so upset with what Jim Comey did to Hillary Clinton, right? He held a press conference and he said, I'm not going to indict her, but she did all kinds of terrible things. And it was like...
The problem with what Comey did was that you're not supposed to do that within a certain distance of an election. I mean, that is one of the sort of the key principles of public corruption cases. But right, yes, there were other issues with that. But yes,
he was unfair to Hillary Clinton because he accused Hillary Clinton of wrongdoing. even though he didn't indict her, which is something prosecutors never do. And Comey's defense is like, look, in this case, it was such an exceptional case that had I simply said I'm not indicting Hillary Clinton with no explanation, 50% of the country would have concluded that the Justice Department was corrupted for partisan reasons. So that's usually what prosecutors do. Mueller, as I understand it, and as the Rod Rosenstein letter says, and as the special counsel statute describes, has a much broader mandate than that. He's not simply acting as a prosecutor, deciding whether or not the evidence rises to the level where indictments are warranted. We already know he indicted nobody for conspiring with the Russians over the election. We already know that he didn't indict Trump Jr. With the Russian government, right? We already know that he didn't indict any Americans for conspiring with Russians over the election.
Well, but that wasn't his mandate, right? I mean, the what we know from the Barr letter is that very specific, like you say, there was a very, very narrow mandate, at least as that no members of the Trump campaign, right, conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. So theoretically, they could have conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in other activities, and non-members of the Trump campaign could have done that, and Russian, I don't know, friends of Russian government theoretically could do that. In terms of like what that line says, we don't know anymore without seeing the Mueller report. Is my point.
Okay, that's fair enough. Although I think in order to know the mandate of the Mueller investigation, the key document to look at is not the Barr letter, but the Rod Rosenstein letter appointing Robert Mueller and describing what his investigation was supposed to examine. And there it was pretty broad. It was not just did the Trump campaign conspire? It was also links between the Trump campaign on the one hand and the Russian government on the other.
Individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. I mean, and we don't know yet, though, right? I mean, that's the thing. We don't know how. We just know what Barr has presented to us.
But we do know. But we do know some things. So, like I said, we know that the Trump campaign as late as September, October of 2016 didn't know what WikiLeaks had, which is why they were trying to get Roger Stone to find out. We know that Mueller closed his investigation without indicting any Trump campaign officials or members of the Trump family for doing any of what you just read, having links to the Russian government or conspiring or collaborating with them over the election, right? There are no indictments. And the point that I was making just now is that Mueller's mandate is not this narrowed standard prosecutorial mandate of tell us whether there's enough evidence to justify an indictment. The Mueller mandate as a special counsel is write a report telling us what actually happened. So this segment of the Barr report that he quoted, which, I don't think anybody thinks that Barr just fabricated a quote. Even these anonymous objectors who are saying that Barr's letter left incriminating stuff out have made clear that they're talking about the obstruction section of the Barr letter and not the collusion or conspiracy section. But we need to know what that sentence is. But when Mueller says the evidence doesn't establish that there was collaboration or conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, I don't think he's simply saying I didn't find enough evidence to rise to that really high level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I think he's saying, I'm speaking as somebody here to tell you what my investigation found happened. We already know he didn't indict. He's saying, this report is designed to tell you what happened, and the evidence doesn't establish that this happened. Now, we should wait for the Mueller report to say for sure, but that to me is my understanding of what Robert Mueller was doing in that report.
Okay, so you're saying that there's the standard of where I'm going to bring an indictment, then there's the standard of what I believe, and then below that may be some evidence, but this is the level of establish. Here's indictment, here's establish, here's anything down to completely exonerated, I guess.
Precise. I mean, nobody would say no evidence, right? Like the Trump Tower meeting is evidence, right? So then the question is it like compelling evidence? Is it convincing? So yeah, Yeah, I agree with you.
I feel like there were people who were getting out in front of their skis on this stuff, and you may be right about what established means in that instance. We're not going to know until we see the report, and I hope we do end up seeing that.